It was a quiet morning. The sun had barely risen, and the politician was sipping his coffee, sitting in the kitchen of his upscale home. The world outside was still, with only the chirping of birds filling the air. He had just gotten comfortable when something caught his eye, movement in the reflection of his window. He glanced outside and saw 4 figures on his sidewalk, standing in a rigid formation. They were dressed in matching polo shirts, sunglasses, and carried an air of authority that seemed off. As he slowly approached the door, he could hear them talking loudly among themselves. He opened the door to find them standing in front of his porch. The woman at the center of the group stood with her arms crossed, exuding an air of arrogance. "We are here to inform you that you are in serious violation of her rules," the woman said, her voice sharp as a whip. "You have been officially cited for unauthorized construction, illegal vehicle parking, and failing to attend mandatory meetings." The politician raised an eyebrow, his calm demeanor not betraying his growing annoyance. "Are you trying to tell me that you have the authority to enforce laws? Are you a real law enforcement agency?" Without a word, the woman pulled out a shiny, fake-looking badge and shoved it in his face. "You are under investigation," she sneered. The politician's gaze sharpened. "Nice try. I'm afraid you've mistaken me for someone else. I'm not the person to mess with." The group of officials stood there, their fake badges gleaming under the morning sun as they tried to intimidate the politician. The woman, whom he now recognized as Karen, took a step forward, her eyes gleaming with arrogance. "We're here to take action. You're under investigation for violating her rules. You've had several warnings. Now, it's time to face the consequences." The politician didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly pulled the door wide open, his eyes scanning the group with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. He could already feel the tension building in the air. But he had one card left to play. Without saying a word, he reached into his jacket, his fingers brushing the smooth leather before pulling out a badge. The fake officials froze, their eyes locking onto the shiny emblem in his hand. "Nice badges," the politician said with a smirk. "But I'm afraid you've made a grave mistake." He opened the badge, letting it glimmer in the sunlight. "This is the real deal. I'm the elected representative of this town. Your so-called authority doesn't exist in my jurisdiction." Karen's confident stance faltered, her hands trembling ever so slightly. You can't just." "I can. And I will," the politician interrupted. "You're impersonating law enforcement officers, which is a crime. You're also attempting to kidnap me based on fabricated claims. Now, if you don't want to end up in jail for real, I suggest you leave, right now." The silence was palpable. The other officials exchanged nervous glances. One of them shifted uncomfortably, realizing the situation had just turned far beyond their understanding. Without another word, they began to retreat, their steps quickening as the politician calmly watched them retreat off his property, his posture never once betraying the power he held. Karen, on the other hand, was seething, her eyes burning with fury as she retreated with her team. "You haven't heard the last of me," she spat, before spinning on her heel and storming off. The politician stood at the door, watching them disappear, knowing this confrontation was only just the beginning. The following morning, as the politician sat at his desk, preparing for another long day in the office, he received an unexpected visitor. The door to his office swung open, and his secretary quickly stepped inside, her face pale. "Sir, you need to see this. It's from the police department." The politician raised an eyebrow. He wasn't expecting any kind of trouble. Taking the envelope from her, he carefully opened it, his eyes scanning the letter. It was a report detailing an accusation made by none other than Karen, the Hoa president. The report claimed that the politician had been involved in multiple illegal activities, unauthorized construction on his property, bribery involving local contractors, and even running an illegal business out of his home. The politician's lips twitched into a smile. Karen was clearly rattled. and her ego was wounded. It wasn't just a petty retaliation anymore, she was going all in, trying to destroy his reputation. The politician wasn't one to back down from such attacks. He had seen enough dirty tricks in his career to know when something smelled fishy. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Well, 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 he muttered to himself. Karen really thinks she can pull this off. He quickly picked up the phone and called his trusted investigator. A sharp, no-nonsense professional who had helped him out of several political battles before. Within hours, the investigator had already set up a thorough inquiry into the allegations, determined to get to the bottom of the Hoa president's lies. Get the facts. All of them. If Karen wants to play this game, we'll expose her for the fraud she is, the politician ordered, his voice cold and unwavering. Meanwhile, Karen was busy spreading her lies, eagerly calling in more complaints to the authorities. She seemed to think that her position as the Hoa president made her untouchable. But the politician was prepared for this kind of move. He was no rookie. He had outsmarted bigger players than Karen before. By the time Karen realized her false report wasn't going unnoticed, it was too late. The politician had already set the wheels of justice in motion. He wasn't going to let her destroy his reputation without a fight. Karen had started a war, but she didn't know that she had just walked into his battlefield. 2 days after the false accusations, a black and white county inspection vehicle rolled up to the politician's estate, its sirens blaring. A group of inspectors, clipboard in hand, stepped out, clearly expecting a confrontation. At the forefront of the group was Karen, her face tight with an air of smug satisfaction, like a cat about to pounce on an unsuspecting mouse. The politician stood in his office, looking out of the window as Karen, flanked by her team, approached the front door. He sighed, shaking his head. It was becoming clear that Karen wasn't going to let this go, no matter how foolish it made her look. "Good morning, sir," one of the inspectors greeted as he knocked. "We're here to inspect your property due to a complaint about unauthorized construction and other violations." He didn't look up from his clipboard as he spoke, seemingly uninterested in anything beyond the job at hand. The politician opened the door slowly, wearing a knowing smile. "Ah, I assume this is Karen's doing?" He gestured to Karen, who stood a few steps behind the inspectors, her arms crossed in a defensive stance. Karen's face flushed, but she didn't respond directly. Instead, she shot the politician a steely glare, her eyes burning with contempt. "Let's just get this over with," she said, trying to maintain her composure. With that, the inspection began. The inspectors fanned out across the property, going through every room, every corner, inspecting the foundations and even checking under the house. The politician, now relaxed, took a seat on his porch, watching them move like ants on a mission. He knew there was nothing wrong with his property, everything was in perfect order. But he could see the frustration building on Karen's face as each inspector came back empty-handed, unable to find any evidence of wrongdoing. After an hour of searching, the lead inspector finally approached the politician. "Sir, I'm afraid we can't find any irregularities or violations on your property. Everything appears to be up to code, and no unauthorized construction is present." Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red as she stepped forward, her voice trembling with anger. "This can't be happening. There must be something." "Enough," the politician interrupted, his voice sharp. "There's no something because there's nothing wrong here. I'm sure you've wasted enough public resources already, Karen. So, why don't you just pack up and leave?" Turning to the inspectors, the politician nodded. "You're dismissed. Thank you for your time." Karen tried to salvage her dignity, but the damage had been done. She stood there for a moment, her fists clenched at her sides, before spinning around and marching off, her henchmen trailing behind her, humiliated. But the politician wasn't finished. As soon as they left, he took out his phone and called his lawyer. "File a formal complaint against the Hoa for harassment and wasting public resources." This farce has gone on long enough. He knew this wasn't the end. Karen might have been defeated this round. But she'd come back with something even worse. And when she did, he'd be ready. Days passed. And the politician could feel the tension still simmering. Karen's failed attempt at a property inspection hadn't deterred her, if anything. It had made her even more determined to discredit him. But he wasn't worried. He knew the truth would eventually come to light. His investigation had already uncovered the cracks in Karen's seemingly perfect facade. It wasn't long before his suspicions were confirmed. The politician, with the help of his trusted investigator, began digging into the Hoa's financial records, cross-referencing transactions, and gathering testimonies from frustrated residents. What they uncovered was nothing short of a scandal. Karen had been embezzling funds from the Hoa for years. She had been siphoning money into a personal account under the guise of community improvement projects while using the funds to throw lavish parties and buy herself expensive gifts. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. As the investigation deepened, it was revealed that Karen had been manipulating the Hoa's rules to drive out residents who opposed her, using false complaints and fines to extort money from the vulnerable. Even more troubling was the discovery that she had been bribing contractors to perform subpar work on community projects, pocketing the difference. With everything laid bare, the politician knew it was time to act. He coordinated with local law enforcement, pushing for a full-scale investigation into the Hoa's financial practices. He called a special meeting in the community room, ensuring that every resident would be present. When the time came, the room was filled with curious, anxious faces. Karen stood at the front, pretending to be confident as she clutched a stack of papers, ready to defend her reign. But before she could speak, the politician stepped forward, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a serious issue," he began, his tone firm and commanding. "For too long, this woman," he gestured toward Karen, "has abused her position. She's been embezzling funds, manipulating residents, and bringing shame to our community. I've gathered all the evidence, and I intend to see justice done." The room was silent for a moment as everyone processed what they were hearing. Karen's face turned pale, and for the first time, she seemed to lose her composure. She opened her mouth to argue, but the politician continued, unfazed. "I've already contacted the authorities, and they'll be here shortly to remove you from your position. You've manipulated, lied, and bullied this community long enough. Your time is up." Karen's attempts at protest fell on deaf ears. Law enforcement arrived within minutes, and the sight of two officers walking into the room only added to the tension. The politician stood tall as Karen's facade crumbled, her protests growing more desperate. But the facts were clear, and the evidence against her was overwhelming. "Karen Thompson, you are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of power," one of the officers said. As they moved to cuff her, the crowd gasped, some of them whispering in disbelief, while others began to cheer as Karen was escorted out of the room. With Karen gone, the neighborhood began to heal. The politician worked alongside the newly formed Hoa board, ensuring that the community would be rebuilt from the ground up. The corrupt practices were eradicated, and new, fair rules were put into place, ensuring that no one would ever again have the kind of unchecked power Karen had held. As the dust settled, the politician looked around at his neighbors, now united and stronger than ever. For once, there was peace in the neighborhood. And for the first time in a long time, the politician could finally breathe easy, knowing that justice had prevailed. Well, there you have it. Karen's reign of terror has come to an end, and the neighborhood is finally free from her corruption. What do you think about the way the politician handled things? Do you believe Karen got what she deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about these epic Hoa battles, make sure to leave a like, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me bring you even more exciting tales of justice, drama, and community showdowns. Don't miss out, there's plenty more to come. Thanks for watching. And I'll see you in the next story.